Chapter 1. Marianne Leonard treasured the start to her day. Regardless of how well she slept, and last night hadn't been bad, getting out of bed always felt like a struggle. But once she'd splashed cold water onto her face, life held promise. The view from her bathroom window helped, breathtaking whatever the season, green as far as the eye could see to the jagged ridge of the Stiper Stones, crowned by the Devil's Chair. Even in the dark of winter, when she rose well before dawn, it was full of magic. Now, in mid-July, summer blew in through the window. About time too. They'd barely reached 15 degrees since early June, and on her wet, windy walk at Titterston Clee, almost a week ago, the bad weather had reached its climax. Below, the dogs greeted the day, thrusting their snouts into overgrown grass. Her wildflower meadow by design, but with fewer flowers than any other year. Daisies and cornflowers mostly, with the odd pink flash of knapweed. On the other side of the hedge, the donkeys grazed alongside Josephine the goat, and the old Highland pony nibbled at the leaves of a young ash. A scene of peace, which for most of her life, she could only have dreamed of. 10 minutes later, she locked the door behind her and set off down the hill. From the cinder track, she had a clear view all the way down the valley to Lower Farm, where the lane met the road. She stiffened at a splash of unexpected colour. A police Land Rover squatted in the Olsons' yard, white and orange against the dark wall. Marianne shuddered and kept her eyes averted until a bend in the path rendered the farm invisible. Her heart lifted a little at the bird's-eye view of the bunkhouse. Her bunkhouse, once a small farmstead, of which her cottage had been the residential dwelling. The main accommodation was in a long stone barn, L-shaped with 2 stories, its timbers and gabled end painted Shropshire green. When she had first viewed the property with Effie, it had been a defunct outdoor adventure centre, half tumbling down, gutters hanging from the bulging walls, damp in every room. 5 years on, with a new roof and complete renovation, it offered sleeping accommodation for 12, with overspill camping in the adjacent field, and a large, well-appointed dining room. As she reached the gate, a hail from the field greeted her. Claire, one of the young archaeologists, always up with the lark, waved a mug at her, coffee judging by the faint scent that wafted across to the yard. Tie-dye clothes and pink dreadlocks. A Trustafarian, Donnell, the lead archaeologist, called her. Marianne liked her. She liked all the youngsters who were cutting their teeth on the dig-up by the ring fort on Green Hill. Now they clustered around their camping stoves, in various degrees of undress, the boys bare-chested, one girl still in pyjamas. They would be among the first for breakfast once Marianne had got it going, always earlier than their bosses who slept in the bunkhouse. Of the 12 beds, the senior archaeologists took 3. 7 had gone to Roger and his woggle trainees, and the other 2 were now occupied by the lads who had arrived the day before. Walking the Shropshire way, they'd said, dumping rucksacks and outdoor gear in the boot room before tucking into Irish stew and baked potatoes. She left the dogs in their run, where they carried out their morning patrol, sniffing and squatting, marking their territory. When she opened up the kitchen, she felt a familiar sense of sanctuary. Her domain, where no one else came except by invitation. All except Donnell, who seemed to think he needed none. One day she would have to disillusion him. Unprompted, the image of the police car flashed into her mind and she squashed it back down. No doubt she'd hear the whole story later. For now, there was breakfast to get. She filled 2 kettles and set them on the range cooker. Then she put trays of sausages, 1 pork, 1 veggie, in the top oven where rashers would soon join them. While the kettles came to the boil, she made her own coffee in a steel Bialetti pot and broke eggs into a glass jug, adding milk and a dash of cream cheese ready for scrambling. At least Donnell had the courtesy to knock, though he seldom waited for an answer before sticking his head round the door. His sandy hair, wispy and thinning on top, was wet, and a splot of blood showed on his cheek where he'd nicked himself shaving.
"Morning. Everything all right?" he said.
Every day the same greeting. What would he do if one day she burst into tears and tore at her hair, sobbed that no, everything was not all right? She imagined that in his fantasies he would wrap her in his arms and soothe her, then spring into action, rustling up breakfast for 20 without turning a hair. The reality would be different. Coughing and shuffling, an awkward pat on the back perhaps, followed by a hasty retreat. "Smells good," he said, neither retreating nor advancing into the kitchen. "I'm starving." "Well, you'll get it all the sooner if you leave me in peace. Coffee and tea will be ready in 2 minutes." With a nod and the usual sheepish smile, he closed the door, and she heard him go into the dining room, other voices mumbling a greeting. The students, probably. None deep or loud enough for Roger. Only a few seconds later than she'd promised, she opened the hatch and set large pots of tea and coffee on the counter. Calls of good morning flew her way, and she smiled, told them to help themselves as usual. 2 of the archaeology students were already ploughing through bowls of cereal, milk dripping down their chins. She turned back to the range, shaking the sausages in their trays and tucking the bacon on the shelf above. Marianne had seen enough institutionalised scrambled eggs, pale rubber clumps adrift in thin liquid, for it to be a point of pride that hers should never be so. Firm but melting, holding its form until it touched teeth and tongue. She always made it in batches.
"Marianne, good morning!"
If the booming voice hadn't startled her, the slam of a large hand on the countertop would have. Roger's hands were like shovels. Donald's second-in-command, Wiltshire Sam, had joked more than once that Roger should give up his day job and join them on the dig, a human excavator. "Morning, Roger." She smiled briefly, then turned back to her work, flipping slices of toast into racks which she carried to the hatch. Roger leaned on the counter while he poured himself a mug of tea. She listened with half her attention as he described the tasks he planned for his trainees that day.
"Good bunch, this. Bit overconfident, maybe. Think it's all going to be easy. Might have managed the devil's chair with no problem, but I'll get them in the river today. Need to shake 'em up a bit."
That meant that they would be out in the minibus, and she would have guaranteed hours of peace in the bunkhouse. Roger had been bringing his Woggle trainees to the bunkhouse since it had opened. Walking Group Leader Award. Woggle to anyone in the know. He ran courses for most of the summer, and often it felt as though he lived there. Donald had been there for the last 3 summers too. They were like a strange married couple, and she their housekeeper, keeper of their worries and their tempers when their low-level bickering got too much. Both liked to be pack leader in their own way. Roger more obviously so. 6'5" of solid bone and muscle, with a head like a bullet, all deep bass voice and chewy Yorkshire vowels. Not soft or beguiling like Donald's Irish burr. At first sight, no one would consider Donald a leader, but he'd led many digs, was well known in Iron Age archaeology, and his students revered him. He'd even been on the television quite a few times, and he had the gift of the gab when he wanted it. Marianne sometimes closed her eyes while he talked to avoid being distracted by his grubby combat trousers and trademark battered hat. With the cooked breakfast passed out through the hatch and arranged on the counter, the guests helped themselves. Marianne went out into the dining room and removed any used dishes and cutlery from the tables, checked and replenished the milk jugs and toast racks. 4 chairs were still empty. The 2 young lads who'd arrived the night before, and 2 of Roger's trainees, Russell and Lucy.
"Seriously," Roger had said after their first day, "you'd think they were on their honeymoon or summat."
Marianne was sure he used words like summit, only for effect.
"Meant to be bouldering and they're busy gazing into each other's eyes."
This week's group were all secondary school teachers, training to lead Duke of Edinburgh programmes in their schools. By the time she next poked her head through the hatch, all the tables were full, the 2 Shropshire way lads now sitting with some of the archaeologists. While the guests ate, she began packing the lunches, checking her list for sandwich fillings and labelling each paper bag clearly. Alice, one of the girls who helped with the cleaning and food prep, arrived, and was all in a flutter as she donned her apron, knotting the ties in front of her bony hips. "Police were down at the farm when I come by," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Saw 2 cars in the yard." "You think a break-in or something?" Marianne asked, as coolly as she could, pouring the girl a cup of coffee. "Either that or Steve's gone on the rampage with his tractor again." "Wasn't it the combine?" Steve Olsen farmed the land around Perkins Beach and had once taken a corner in the village too fast, delivering the combine to whichever farm was next to use it. Half the church wall had gone. Rumour had it he'd had a beer or 2, but there'd been no charges. Steve said the wall had been tumbling down anyway, and the vicar had been glad to get the insurance and have it repaired. His brother-in-law had done the work, and made a good job of it. It had worked out well all round. "Do you think they'll come up here?" Alice said, her face flushed. It was true they got little excitement, but a visit from the police wasn't high on Marianne's list of entertainment options. If she never had anything to do with them again, she'd die happy.